Imagine this, a portfolio website that not only looks stunning, but moves, with smooth animations, a custom 3D model, and a layout that feels alive on every screen size. And guess what? You're about to build it from scratch using just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. In this video, I'll walk you through each step, line by line. No fluff, no frameworks, just clean, modern, animated web design made simple. You'll learn how to integrate a real-time 3D model from Spline, animate your content with GSAP, and make everything responsive and professional. And hey, if you're excited to learn and build cool stuff like this, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next creative project coming soon. All right, let's dive in. Your future portfolio starts right here. All right, let's get started with this project. To begin, I've prepared a basic structure and some starter files, which you can download from the GitHub repository linked in the description box below this video. Once you're on the page, I'd really appreciate it if you could give the repo a star to support the project. After that, click the green button that says Code and select the Download ZIP option to download the files. Once the download is complete, go ahead and extract the ZIP file. Now you've got all the files ready to use. Drag and drop this extracted folder into your code editor. Now that we're in our editor, let's see what we've got here. You'll notice a README file, a thumbnail image, and an images folder. The thumbnail image isn't needed for our project, it's just a placeholder, so let's go ahead and delete it. Inside the images folder, there's a profile picture. You can replace this with your own photo later to personalize the portfolio, but for now, we'll leave it as it is. Inside the index.html file, you'll find some basic setup. At the very top, we have the title tag. This is what appears in the browser tab when someone visits your site. You can customize this to anything you like. Below that, we've included a Google font. This font will be used for certain text elements like the logo and headings to give them a unique and professional look. Moving further down, we've linked the style.css file. This is where all the styling for the project will live. It controls how the page looks, the colors, layouts, fonts, and overall design. After that, we've added two plugins from GSAP, the GreenSock animation platform. These plugins are what we'll use to create smooth animations throughout the site, like fading in text or sliding images into view. Finally, we've linked the app.js file at the bottom of the body tag. This file is where all the JavaScript functionality goes. Linking it at the end ensures that the browser loads the HTML structure and styles first before running any scripts. Next, let's navigate to the style.css file. Here, we've added some basic global styles to reset the default browser settings. We set the margin and padding to 0 to remove unwanted spacing and use box sizing border box so elements size more predictably. Finally, scroll behavior. Smooth makes the page scroll smooth. Below that, we've defined two root sections for our color themes, one for dark mode and one for light mode. We start with the root selector. This is where we set CSS variables that act like custom values we can reuse throughout our project. These include things like our main accent color, text colors, background shades, border color, and shadow. These values create the base for our default theme, which in this case is dark mode. Then we define a second block using data theme, light. This overrides some of those same variables but with lighter values. For example, setting the background to white and the text to dark gray. When we switch the theme to light, the browser will use these instead. By doing this, we make it super easy to switch between light and dark modes in our project without rewriting the entire CSS. We just change one attribute in the HTML, and all the colors update automatically. It's a clean and modern way to manage themes in any website. Finally, we've set some styles specifically for the body tag. This is the main container for everything visible on our page. First, we define the font family. We're using a clean, modern font called Inter. Then, we set the background color using the BG primary variable. Since we're using CSS variables, this value will automatically switch when we change themes between dark and light mode. Next, we set the text color using text primary, so again, it adapts to the current theme. We also hide horizontal overflow by setting overflow X to hidden. This helps prevent unwanted side scrolling if something pushes outside the viewport. Then we set the line height to 1.6, which improves the spacing between lines of text and makes everything easier to read. And finally, we add a smooth transition effect for background and text colors. So when the theme switches, the change isn't sudden, it fades in smoothly, making the experience feel more polished. Now, let's navigate to our app.js file and see what we've got here. At the very top, we're working with GSAP. That's the GreenSock animation platform, a powerful tool for creating smooth, professional animations on the web. In our HTML file, we already included the GSAP and scroll trigger plugins using CDN links, so they're ready to use. Here in JavaScript, we simply declare two constants, one for GSAP itself and another for scroll trigger. By assigning them from the window object, we're just making sure we can access these tools easily throughout our script. No installations, no imports, just a quick setup, and we're good to go. So now, to start building the layout, let's head back to our HTML file and open the project using Live Server. If everything is set up correctly, the page should load with a black background by default. That's coming from our dark theme settings. Now, inside the body tag, the very first section we're going to add is the navigation. We begin by creating a nav element. This acts as the container for our entire header. Inside the nav, we add a div with a class of nav container. Think of this as our layout wrapper to help us align everything nicely. Inside this container, the first thing we need is a logo. So, we create another div, give it the class name logo, and put some text inside it. You can set this text to be your name, your initials, or even the name of your brand. It's fully customizable. Right below that, we create an unordered list, basically a menu. This list has a class called navlink. Inside it, we add list items, each containing an anchor tag. Create 5 items total and label them as home, about, skills, projects, and contact. After that, we're going to add a theme toggle. This will let users switch between light and dark mode. To do that, we add a div below our list and apply some inline styles. We set it to display as flex and align the items in the center so things look balanced. Inside this container, we add another nested div with a class name of theme toggle and an ID of theme toggle written in camel case. That ID will help us grab the element later in JavaScript to make the toggle functional. Within the toggle, we place 2 span elements, one for dark mode and one for light mode. For the icons, I'll be using the default Windows keyboard icons, but feel free to use any icon library you prefer. Great alternatives include box icons or Google's material icons. Both spans share the same class theme toggle icon, but we also give one the extra class moon and the other sun. This helps us target and style them separately in our CSS later on. So for example, we can give the moon a darker look and the sun a bright color. And that's all the HTML we need right now for the desktop navigation. We'll handle the mobile menu, including a sidebar later on in this tutorial. For now, let's head over to our CSS file and begin styling this header so it looks clean and professional. Here, we start by styling the nav element itself. This is our main navigation bar that stays at the top of the page. First, we set its position to fixed, which means it stays locked at the top of the screen even when the user scrolls down. Then, we set the top to 0 so it hugs the very top edge of the browser. Next, we give it a full width using 100 BW. For spacing, we apply some padding on the top and bottom and a bit more on the left and right to give the content some breathing room. To give it a sleek, modern look, we apply a semi-transparent background color using an RGBA value. This keeps it dark but slightly see-through, which feels more dynamic. To enhance this effect, we add a backdrop blur. This softens the content behind the nav bar and creates a frosted glass feel. We also make sure the nav bar sits above everything else by giving it a high z-index value. This prevents it from being covered by other elements. And finally, we add a smooth transition on the background color, so if we ever change it, like during scrolling or theme switching, it happens gradually. Down below, we define a style specifically for when the page is in light theme. We do that using an attribute selector that targets data theme of light and then specifically styles the nav element inside it. Here, we set the background color of the navigation to a semi-transparent white. This gives the nav a soft, elegant look while keeping it slightly visible over the content below, almost like a glass effect. Now let's style our nav container to structure everything neatly inside the nav bar. Then we use Flexbox to do that. By setting display to flex, it aligns the child elements in a row. Then we use justify content, space between, which pushes the logo to one side and the navigation links to the other, creating clean spacing. Align items, center, make sure everything is vertically centered in the nav bar. Next, we want to limit the width of the container, so we set a max width of 1400 pixels and center it with margin 0 auto. Now it's time to style the elements inside our navigation bar, starting with the logo. So, we target the .logo class first. We want the logo text to stand out, so we increase the font size to make it more visible. Then, we set the font weight to bold, which gives it a stronger appearance. We use our accent color variable to make it pop visually, and finally apply a more elegant serif font, in this case, Playfair Display, to give it a bit of a personal and stylish feel. That's it for the logo. Next, let's style the navigation links. Remember, this is the unordered list that contains all our page sections like home, about, skills, and so on. We set it to use flexbox so all the items align in a row. We remove the default bullet points by setting list style to none. Then, we create some spacing between each link using a gap of 2 rem. And finally, we add a smooth transition effect so that if any animation or transform happens later, for example, on hover it looks nice and smooth. Now let's style the anchor tags inside each of our navigation list items. This is where we'll add a nice hover effect using pseudo elements, perfect for making our links feel interactive and polished. First, we remove the default underline using text decoration, none, and set the text color using our theme's primary text color. We also bump up the font weight slightly to make the links a bit more bold. Then, we add a smooth transition to the color so that when a user hovers, the change isn't abrupt, and we set the position to relative. This is important because we're going to use a pseudo element positioned absolutely inside it. Now for the hover effect, when we hover over the link, we simply change its color to the accent color, which gives us a nice visual cue. But the real magic comes with the after pseudo element. We create a tiny horizontal line that will slide in from the left when the user hovers. So at first, the width is set to 0, but when we hover, it smoothly expands to 100%, creating that underlining animation. It's a simple but very modern and effective way to make your navigation links feel dynamic and responsive. Great job so far. Now, let's move on and style the theme toggle button, the one that switches between light and dark mode. We're going to target the theme toggle class. First up, we set the position to relative. This is important because we'll be placing inner elements, like the toggle circle, and we need to control their position inside this container. Next, we give it a fixed size 60 pixels wide and 30 pixels tall. That gives us the basic shape of a toggle switch. We then apply a background color using a CSS variable called BG secondary, which allows the background to match the current theme, maybe dark in dark mode and light in light mode. After that, we add border radius, 15px, to fully round the corners and make it look smooth and modern. To make it interactive, we set the cursor to pointer, so when users hover over it, they know it's clickable. Then we add a smooth transition on the background color, so when the theme switches, the background changes gradually instead of instantly. We also apply a subtle border using 2px solid var border color to help it visually stand out from the background. Finally, we add margin left, 1 rem, to push it slightly away from any element on its left, usually a logo or menu. Now, to create the sliding knob inside the toggle, we use a pseudo element with theme toggle before. This is like adding an extra decorative element inside the toggle without adding more HTML. We start with content, empty, to generate the pseudo element. Then we position it absolutely so we can place it exactly where we want inside the toggle. We move it 2 pixels from the top and 2 pixels from the left to center it nicely inside the pill. We make the size of this knob 22px by 22px, which is smaller than the main toggle, allowing it to fit comfortably inside and slide back and forth. The background color of this knob is set to a variable called accent. We also apply border radius, 50%, to make it a perfect circle, and a soft transition on transform so it slides smoothly. Finally, we add a glowing box shadow around it for a nice lighting effect. When the theme changes to light mode, we use data theme of light.theme toggle before to update the knob styles. We apply transform translate 28px to slide it to the right side of the toggle. This lines it up perfectly inside the container. We also update the background color to color and change the glow to a bluish tone using box shadow. Next, we focus on the icons inside the toggle, the sun and the moon, which help users understand what mode they're in. Both icons share a common class, theme toggle icon. We position them absolutely so they can float inside the toggle and use top 50% with transform and add a smooth transition on opacity so they fade in and out when toggled. The sun icon is placed to the right using right of 6px, and by default, we hide it with opacity of 0 since dark mode is active first. The moon icon is placed on the left with left of 5px, and it's visible initially with opacity of 1. Finally, when the theme is set to light mode, we switch these. We make the sun icon fully visible by setting its opacity to 1, and we hide the moon icon by setting its opacity to 0. That's it for the styling of the theme toggle. We will add functionality to it to change the theme between light and dark mood. Let's start by grabbing the actual toggle element from the HTML. Remember earlier in the HTML file, we gave that toggle a unique ID so we can easily reference it later in JavaScript. We're going to use that now. First, we open our app.js file. This is where all the interactivity for our website lives. Think of it like the brain behind our site. Here, we're going to write the logic that listens for clicks on our theme toggle and switches the theme between light and dark. We save it in a constant variable. And let's name it using camel case, which is the common JavaScript naming style. So we'll name it theme toggle, one word, lowercase first letter, and capital T in the middle. We use document.getElementById. This is a built-in JavaScript method that allows us to select any element by its ID. Inside the parentheses, we pass the string that matches the ID we gave the toggle. So if the ID was theme toggle, we write that in quotes. Next, we also need access to the body tag of our document because we're going to add or remove an attribute on the body to control the entire theme of the site. This is a smart and efficient way to toggle themes because all the CSS is already listening to a data theme attribute on the body. When we change that, the whole look of the website updates in one go. We store that in another constant variable and we'll call it body. We simply write document.body, which is another built-in way to directly grab the body tag in JavaScript. So at this point, we've selected the two elements we need, the theme toggle switch and the body element. These two will work together to create the theme switching effect. Perfect. Let's move on to actually defining the logic that makes the theme switch happen. We'll write a small but powerful block of JavaScript that not only toggles between dark and light mode, but also remembers the user's preference. So even if they refresh the page or come back tomorrow, the site stays in the mode they chose. So first, we want to check if the user has already picked a theme before. We do this using something called local storage. This is a built-in browser feature that allows us to save small pieces of data in the user's browser, and it stays there, even after they close the tab or shut down their computer. We try to get the theme value from local storage using the getItem method and look for a key called theme. If there's no value stored yet, meaning the user has never picked a theme, then we'll just default to dark. We use the logical OR operator to fall back to dark when nothing is found. Now we take that current theme value, whether it's from local storage or our default, and apply it to the website by setting an attribute called dataTheme on the body element. This is key, because in our CSS, we've written styles that respond to this exact attribute. So by switching its value, we instantly flip the whole design between light and dark mode. Next, we make the toggle interactive. We do that by adding an event listener to our theme toggle element. An event listener is basically saying, hey browser, when someone clicks on this button, run this function. Inside that function, we first check what the current theme is. We do that by reading the value of the data theme attribute from the body. Then we create a new variable, let's call it new theme, and this will be the opposite of the current one. So if the current theme is dark, the new theme should be light, and if it's light, we flip it to dark. We use a ternary operator for this. It's a short and clean way to write if-else logic in JavaScript. Then, we update the body's attribute to the new theme using setAttribute, just like before. and this is what causes the CSS to react and switch colors. But we also want to remember the user's choice for next time, so we save the new theme in local storage using setItem under the same theme key. This way, the next time the user visits the site, the first step we wrote earlier will read that stored value and apply it right away. Finally, for a bit of fun and a polished feel, let's animate the toggle when it's clicked. We use GSAP here, that's our animation library. We tell it to scale the toggle down slightly to give a press effect and then bounce it back to its original size. The animation lasts 0.3 seconds. It repeats once using a yo-yo effect. So it goes forward and then reverses, and it uses a nice easing function to make the motion feel natural. And that's it. With just a few lines of code, we've added a complete, functional, and animated theme switcher to our site. It's clean, user-friendly, and persistent across visits. It seems there's an issue when switching to light mode. The moon icon should disappear, but it remains visible. Let's head back to the CSS file. And yes, I've spotted a small typo here. Always double-check your code, as even minor mistakes like this can lead to unexpected behavior. Great, now it's time to add the menu sidebar to our navigation that is going to display on mobile devices. So, let's navigate to our HTML file, and here, right below the theme toggle's main container div, we're going to start by creating the actual menu icon itself. This icon is what the user will tap on mobile screens to open and close the sidebar menu. To do that, we create a simple div element. We give it a class name of menu toggle. This is for applying the base styles. And for the JavaScript part later, we also give it an ID of menu toggle using camel case. Now inside this div, we create 3 empty span elements. These spans are going to visually represent the classic hamburger menu icon, those 3 stacked horizontal lines. And later on, when the menu is opened, we'll add a transformation using CSS so these lines rotate and turn into a close X icon. I'll explain how that works step by step when we get to the styling. Alright, now that we have the icon created, let's build the structure for the mobile sidebar menu itself. So right below the entire nav element, not inside it, but right after it, we're going to add a new div. This will serve as the container for our mobile menu. We give this div a class name of mobile menu, and just like with the icon, we also assign it an ID of mobile menu using camel case. This ID will help us control the menu using JavaScript later on. Inside this mobile menu container, we simply add 5 anchor tags, and each of these should have the exact same labels as our navigation menu on the desktop: Home, About, Projects, Skills, and Contact. That way, the navigation is consistent whether the user is on desktop or mobile. And that's it for the HTML structure of the sidebar. Now, let's move on to our CSS file and start styling both the hamburger menu icon and the sidebar menu layout. We'll make sure everything looks modern, clean, and responsive. So here we start by targeting the menu toggle class itself in our CSS file. This is the container that wraps those 3 span lines, and we want to make sure it's laid out correctly and visually clickable. First, we set its display to flex. That allows us to stack its child elements, which are the spans, in a flexible way. Then, we set the flex direction to column so that those 3 lines stack vertically, one on top of the other. After that, we set the cursor to pointer. Finally, we give this element a z-index of 101. That's a high value that ensures the menu toggle icon always appears on top of everything else on the page. Now let's target all the span elements inside the menu toggle. These are the visual lines that make up the hamburger icon. We start by giving them a fixed width of 25 pixels and a height of 3 pixels, making them thin horizontal bars. Then we set their background color to a CSS variable, in this case text primary, so that they match the current theme's text color, whether it's light or dark. Next, we add margin of 3 pixels vertically, which adds spacing between each of the 3 lines so they don't sit right on top of each other. And finally, we set the transform origin to center. This is important for when we animate the menu later. When we rotate or transform the spans, they'll rotate around their center point, giving us a smooth and clean animation when switching to the X icon. So as I said earlier, this menu icon will transform into an X icon when the mobile menu is opened. We'll make this happen using a special class called active, and we'll apply this class dynamically using JavaScript when the menu toggle is clicked. Let's break it down step by step. First, we're going to target the first span inside our .menu toggle when it has the active class. This is the top line of the hamburger icon. In our CSS, we say when .menuToggle has a class of active and we're styling its first span, use nth_child1, apply a transform that rotates it 45 degrees and moves it diagonally down and to the right, using translate 6px, 6px. This starts to form 1/2 of the X shape. Next, we move to the second span, which is the middle line. When the menu is open, we don't want this middle line to be visible otherwise. It would interrupt our clean X shape. So we simply set its opacity to 0, which makes it completely invisible but still takes up space. This helps maintain structure and makes transitions smooth. Now finally, we style the third span, which is the bottom line. Just like the first one, we rotate this too, but in the opposite direction. So we rotate it -45 degrees, which tilts it the other way, and then we translate it up and to the right using translate 6px -6px. Now we have two diagonal lines crossing each other, forming a perfect X. Now to test the transform, we can manually add this active class to the menu toggle element to see if it works. So just navigate to HTML file and add the active class here, and as we see, the menu icon has now changed into a nice X shape. Great, that means our transform styles are working perfectly. But right now, we're adding that class manually just to test it. What we want instead is to make this behavior dynamic, so when the user clicks on the menu icon, the active class will automatically be added or removed. But before we define that JavaScript logic, let's go ahead and style the menu sidebar itself when it is opened. Because remember, this menu icon is not just decorative, it also controls the visibility of the actual menu panel on mobile. So when we click the icon, we want the menu sidebar to slide in and out of view. So let's navigate back to our CSS file. Here we'll start by targeting the .mobile menu class. That's the sidebar menu we created earlier in our HTML. First, we set the position to fixed. Next, we set top and left both to 0. This pins the top left corner of the menu panel to the top left corner of the screen. Then we set the width to 100%, meaning the menu will stretch across the full width of the screen. We give it a height of 100 V each. That stands for 100% of the viewport height, so it takes up the entire screen from top to bottom. For the background, we use a CSS variable, in this case var bg primary. Now for layout, we set display to flex, and then flex direction to column. This means that the menu items, which are our anchor tags, will stack vertically. Then we use align items, center, and justify content of center to center all the menu links perfectly both horizontally and vertically on the screen. Next is the Z index. We set it to 999. Now the key part, we add a transform, translate X -100%. This moves the entire menu panel completely off the screen to the left by 100% of its own width. Finally, we add a transition on the transform property, with a duration of void 3 seconds and easing set to ease. This ensures that when we later change the transform value to bring the menu into view, it animates smoothly rather than jumping instantly. Next, we define the active state for our sidebar menu, just like we did earlier for the menu icon. So now we're saying, when the active class is added to our mobile menu, we want its position on the axis to reset back to 0%. This brings the sidebar fully into view from the left side of the screen. Let's test it manually before writing any JavaScript just to make sure the styling is working. So, if you go back to your HTML and add the active class directly to the mobile menu div, you'll notice the sidebar slides in. That means our transition is working perfectly, and the transform is being updated as expected. Alright, now let's move on to styling the anchor tags, the actual menu links inside our sidebar. We'll target the anchor tags that are inside the .mobile menu. Let me break down the styles we apply here, line by line. We start by setting the text color. We use a CSS variable here, something like var text primary, so it matches the rest of the theme and adapts based on light or dark mode. Next, we remove the default underline by setting text decoration to none. That gives us a cleaner, more modern look. After that, we increase the font size to 2 rem. We then apply a font weight of 600, which gives the text a bold, readable appearance without making it too heavy. Then we add some spacing using margin of 1 rem 0. Now for the font style, we specify a serif font, in this case Playfair display. This adds a touch of elegance and makes our navigation feel more refined and polished. We then apply a transform of translate y20px. What this does is shift each link downward by 20 pixels from its final resting position. That sets us up to create a nice animation effect. To support that animation, we apply a transition. We use all point3's ease, which means any change in the link's appearance, like position or opacity, will animate smoothly over 0.3 seconds. And finally, we set the opacity to 0. This means the anchor tags start off fully transparent. This will let us create a staggered fade-in animation when the menu opens, which we'll handle in JavaScript later. Now let's say when the mobile menu is active, the anchor tags will be visible again with opacity of 1, and the transform translate of y will go back to 0. That's it. This makes sure that each link fades in and slides smoothly into place when the menu opens. Now, let's remove the active class from the mobile menu just to clean up our HTML. Now it's time to define the logic for opening and closing the mobile menu. So let's navigate to our app.js file. And here, right below the theme toggle logic, we define two constants, one for the menu toggle icon and one for the mobile menu itself. We get them using their IDs. Then we add a click event listener to the menu toggle icon. Every time the user clicks on it, we want to toggle the active class on both the menu toggle and the mobile menu. This means the hamburger icon changes to a close icon, and the sidebar menu slides into view or hides away, depending on its current state. Next, we want to prevent the body from scrolling when the mobile menu is open, so inside the event listener, after toggling the active classes, we check if the mobile menu now contains the active class. If it does, that means the menu is currently open, so we set the body's overflow style to hidden. This stops the page behind the menu from scrolling. If the menu does not contain the active class, meaning it's been closed, we reset the overflow by setting it back to an empty string, which allows normal scrolling again. And just like that, we've added smooth, interactive, mobile-friendly functionality to our navigation. The user clicks the icon, it transforms, the sidebar slides in, links animate into view, and background scroll is locked. When they click again, everything resets. Looks great, but let's enhance the animation a little bit more. We want to add a nice cascading effect to our mobile menu links, so when the sidebar opens, the anchor tags don't just appear all at once. Instead, they show up one by one, each with a slight delay. This gives the user a smoother and more elegant visual experience. What we're going to do is apply a small transition delay to each individual anchor tag based on its order. We'll start with the first anchor tag, retarget it using the nth child 1 selector, and add a transition delay of 0.1 seconds. This means as soon as the mobile menu becomes active, this first link will wait 0.1 seconds before it starts its fade in and slide up animation. Now let's copy this first anchor tag's delay and paste it 4 times. We have 5 anchor tags in total. We keep repeating this pattern for each link. 0.2 seconds for the second one, 0.3 seconds for the third one, 0.4 seconds for the fourth, 0.5 seconds for the fifth. By doing this, each link will animate into view slightly after the one before it, creating that beautiful cascading animation effect. It gives our mobile menu a smooth, polished look that feels really modern and professional. And with that, we've officially wrapped up the mobile menu section of our project. Now keep in mind, this menu toggle and the entire mobile sidebar should only be visible on smaller screen sizes, like phones or small tablets, so we definitely don't want it showing up on larger desktop screens. To handle that, we'll scroll up in our CSS file and change the display of the menu toggle from flex to none by default. That way it won't be visible on bigger screens. We'll take care of the responsive behavior by using media queries, so the menu toggle will automatically show up when the screen width is below a certain breakpoint. Alright, now before we jump into building the hero section, which is a very important part of any portfolio, let's first add something really nice to polish the first impression of the site, a simple, smooth loading screen. So let's navigate back to our HTML file and scroll up to the very top, right above the navigation section. Here we're going to create the basic structure of our loading screen. First, we'll create a div and give it a class name of loader. This will be our outer container for everything related to the loading animation. Inside this loader div, we'll nest another div which will simply hold a loading message, like loading or something creative if you prefer. We'll give this div a class name of loading text so we can style it separately. Now, just below this text element, still inside the main loader container, we'll add one more div and give it a class name of loadBar. And finally, inside this loadBar, we'll add another nested div with a class name of loader progress. This small inner div will visually grow in width using CSS animations to simulate loading progress. Once the animation completes, we'll later use JavaScript to hide the loader and reveal the main site. That wraps up the HTML structure for the loading screen. Next, we'll style it and then bring it to life with a touch of animation. So let's navigate to our CSS file and scroll up to where we've already styled the nav element. Now, right above those nav styles, we're going to define the styles for our loader screen. We'll begin by targeting the .loader class, which is the main wrapper for our entire loading screen. First, we set its position to fixed. Then we set the width to 100% and the height to 100. That tells the loader to take up the full width of the screen and the full height of the viewport. We apply the background color. We'll use our custom CSS variable here, bgPrimary. Next, we set the display to flex and align items to center the content vertically. Also set the justify content to center it horizontally. Because we want the text to appear on top of the loading bar, stacked vertically, we set flex direction to column. And finally, we give it a very high z index value, like 999. Next, let's move on to styling the actual text inside our loader. So we'll target the .loading text class. Here, we'll give the text a font size of 2 rem, so it's nice and readable, and then increase the font weight to 600 to make it bold and prominent. That gives it a clean, professional look. Now let's style the loader bar itself. We target the load bar class and first set the width to 300 pixels. This gives us a decent length that looks good across screen sizes. Then we define the height as 4 pixels to keep it sleek and minimal. We give it a background color using our CSS variable for BG secondary so it blends with our overall theme. Then, to make the ends of the bar look smooth and modern, we apply a border radius of 2 pixels. And finally, we add overflow. Hidden. Now let's finish by styling the inner progress bar, which is the loader progress class. This is the bar that visually fills up from left to right. We set its width and height both to 100% so it matches the exact size of the loader bar container. Then we add a beautiful gradient as the background. We use a linear gradient going 90 degrees from our primary color to an accent color using CSS variables. All this gives the animation a vibrant, modern feel as the bar fills. But right now, if we look at the page, this progress bar is just sitting there fully visible. What we want is for it to start at 0% width and then animate all the way to 100% when the page loads. So to make that happen, we'll head over to our JavaScript file inside app.js and define a simple logic that gradually increases the width from 0 to 100%. And once it's done, we'll hide the loader and reveal the rest of the website. So let's now define the logic for our loading animation using JavaScript. We're going to create a function called initLoader, which will handle everything related to the loading screen. Think of this function as the little intro scene before the main website shows up. Inside this function, we first grab 3 elements from the DOM using document.querySelector. The first one is the loader wrapper itself. This is the full screen overlay that covers the entire page. The second one is the loading text, the part that says something like loading or anything you want. And finally, we select the inner progress bar, the colored bar that will animate from left to right. Now that we've selected our elements, we start adding animation using GSAP, which is a powerful JavaScript animation library that helps make things smooth and polished. First, we animate the loading text. We use GSAP.to, and what this does is smoothly transition the opacity of the text from 0 to full visibility. We set the duration to 0.7 seconds, which means it will fade in gently, and for the easing, we use power2.out, which gives us a natural, soft finish to the animation. Now that we've defined the animation for the loader text, let's return to the CSS and set its opacity to 0 by default. Once that's done, head over to the app.js file so we can continue animating the loader sequence. Next, we animate the width of the progress bar. Again, we use GSAP.to to change the width of the .loader progress from 0 to 100%. This time the duration is 2 seconds, and the easing is set to power 2.in out, which means it starts slowly, speeds up in the middle, and then slows down at the end, making it feel smooth and fluid. But the cool part is this. Once the progress bar reaches 100%, we chain another animation using the onComplete callback. Inside that callback, we animate the whole loader overlay. We reduce its opacity to 0 over 0.7 seconds, so it fades out. And then, once it's invisible, we completely hide it by setting its display to none. This removes it from the page layout, freeing up the space for our actual website content to appear. And lastly, we call another function named initAnimations. This will trigger any animations we want to start once the site is ready, like hero text sliding in, images fading up, or whatever we've planned for the intro sequence. Right now, we've only completed the navigation section of our portfolio project. So let's enhance it by adding a smooth reload animation. To set this up, we'll first define a function in our JavaScript file called initAnimations. Think of this function as the place where we'll group all the main entry animations that happen once the page is loaded. For now, we'll just focus on the navigation. But later, we will also add animations for the hero section, text, images, and other elements inside this same function. But before jumping into the nav animation logic, let's switch over to our CSS file, because there's a bit of setup we need to do there first. In order for the navigation to slide in from the top, we need to place it out of view when the page first loads. To do that, we go to the CSS section where we styled the nav element, and right there, we apply a transform style with translate y set to -100%. This will push the whole navigation bar completely out of the visible viewport, so it's hidden above the screen at the start. Now that the nav is sitting above the page, hidden from view, let's return to our JavaScript file, specifically inside the initAnimations function. Here we use GSAP again to animate the navigation. We call GSAP.to, targeting the nav element. What we want to do is bring its Y position from -100% back to 0, basically sliding it straight down into its final position at the top of the page. We'll set the duration of this animation to 1 second to keep it smooth but noticeable, and for the easing we'll use power 3.out, which starts fast and slows down at the end, giving us a nice natural-looking animation. Great, now that we've defined the animation for our navigation and also created the logic for our loader, the final step to make everything work together is to make sure our loader function actually runs when the page finishes loading. To do that, we'll add one line of JavaScript where we attach an event listener to the window object. This event listener listens for the load event, which basically means the moment when all assets on the page, including images, styles, and scripts, have fully loaded. And once that happens, it calls our initLoader function. This is important because we don't want the loader animation or any other transition to run before the page is ready. So we simply tell the browser, when the window has fully loaded, go ahead and start the loader animation by calling initLoader. Now, once you save your code and reload the page in your browser, you'll see everything come to life. First, the loader will appear with its smooth progress bar and fade in text. Then once the loading completes, the loader will fade out. And immediately after that, the navigation bar will slide down gracefully from the top into place. This sequence gives your site a smooth and professional entrance. It's subtle, but it makes a big difference in how polished your project feels. Alright, great job so far. Now let's move on to one of the coolest parts of our portfolio project. We're going to create a custom cursor. And this is going to feel very modern and interactive. The idea is to replace the default mouse cursor with a smooth animated one that follows your movement. So first, we head over to our HTML file. Right below the loader container, just before the nav starts, and here we're going to create two new div elements. The first one is for the actual cursor, a small solid circle that will sit directly under the mouse pointer. We'll give it a class name of cursor. The second one is the cursor follower, slightly bigger hollow circle that lags just a bit behind the main cursor to create that stylish trailing effect. Now that we have those two elements in the HTML, let's style them. So navigate to the CSS file, scroll to the top where we're styling the navigation, and just above that, we'll start by targeting the .cursor class. We want this main cursor to be a fixed size circle that smoothly follows our mouse. So we give it a fixed position so it's always pinned to the viewport. We set its width and height to 20 pixels and give it a solid background using our accent color. Make sure to give it a border radius of 50% to make it perfectly circular. We also set pointer events to none so it doesn't block any mouse interactions on the page, and bump the Z index way up so it's always on top of everything. Finally, we apply Mix Blend Mode Difference, which creates a really nice visual effect where the cursor inverts the background as it moves over it. Right below that, we'll style the Cursor Follower class. This one is a bit larger. We'll set it to 40 pixels wide and tall. And instead of a background, we give it a border, also using the accent color. Again, we make it perfectly circular. Set pointer events to none and lower the Z index just slightly below the main cursor so it doesn't overlap it. We also add a transform transition so when it moves, it feels smooth and floaty. Now the visuals are ready, but the cursor doesn't move yet, so let's give it life. Head over to the app.js file. We're going to use GSAP here to animate the cursor movement. We start by checking if the user is on a desktop device. We do this because on smaller screens like phones or tablets, custom cursors aren't really needed and can even cause glitches. So we add a condition that only runs this code if the window's width is greater than 768 pixels. Inside this condition, we first grab the two cursor elements from the DOM using query selector. One is the dot cursor, the small solid circle, and the other is the dot cursor follower, which is that slightly bigger outlined circle that trails behind. Now comes the fun part. We add an event listener to the entire document for the mouse move event. This means that every time the user moves their mouse anywhere on the page, we'll fire a function that updates the position of our custom cursors. Inside this function, we use GSAP's to-on method to animate the cursor positions. For the main dot cursor, we animate it directly to the new mouse position. But here's the trick. We subtract 10 pixels from both the X and Y values. Why? Because the cursor is 20 pixels wide, and we want the center of it to sit exactly under the pointer. We also set a very short duration, 0.1 seconds, so the animation is super quick and feels responsive. The result is that the main cursor tracks very tightly to the mouse. Then we do almost the same thing for the cursor follower, but with a slight change. Here, we subtract 20 pixels from the X and Y values because this element is 40 pixels wide, and again, we want it centered on the pointer. But notice the difference. We set the duration a bit longer, 0.2 seconds, which means it lags slightly behind the main cursor. This creates that smooth trailing effect, where it feels like the circle is floating and easing into place instead of snapping instantly. And just like that, we've now created a custom cursor that feels fluid, elegant, and completely changes the feel of the website. Alright, now let's create the hero section, the first thing visitors see. We'll start in the HTML file just below the mobile menu container. First, we add a section tag with an ID of home and a class of hero. Inside that, we create a div for the background, call it hero BG. This is just a colored layer behind everything. Next, we add a div with the class hero content. This holds all the actual content. Inside it, we drop an h1 for your name with the class hero title. Then an h2 as your subtitle, something like creative developer, with the class hero subtitle. Below that, add a p tag for a short personal description, class it hero description. Finally, we add an anchor tag that says view my work with the class ta button. And to finish, we place an image element below the content for your profile picture. We link our profile image from the images folder to it. Then we give this image a class name of hero image. That's it. Now let's navigate to our CSS file and start styling our hero section. We're going to scroll all the way down, below all our existing styles, and begin by targeting the .hero class. That's the main wrapper for our hero section. First, we give it a height of 100 VH. This makes the section take up the full height of the screen. Next, we set display to flex and use aligned items, center and justify content. Center, this centers everything inside the hero section, both vertically and horizontally. We also set position to relative. And finally, we add overflow, hidden. We're now going to target hero BG class. This is the element we created specifically to handle the background design. First, we give it a position of absolute. We set top and left both to 0, and then set both the width and height to 100% so it fully covers the hero area. Now for the background itself, we apply a radial gradient that starts in the center of the section. The gradient begins with a soft bluish color using RGBA for transparency, and it fades out to fully transparent by the time it reaches halfway across. This gives us a nice subtle spotlight effect behind our content without being too distracting. Now we move on to styling the hero image. We simply target the .hero image class. We give it a height of 60% so it stands out nicely but doesn't overwhelm the layout. Then we add margin left and margin right with a value of 5%. This gives the image breathing room on both sides and keeps it visually balanced. But when we check the browser, the styles don't seem to apply. That's a signal something's off. So we quickly jump back to the HTML, and sure enough, we find a small mistake. The class name used on the image doesn't match what we've written in CSS. We correct the class name in the HTML to hero image, save everything, refresh the page. Great! Now that the image is sitting perfectly in our hero section, let's continue styling the rest of the content. We'll style the .hero content container. We align the text to the center, which helps everything feel balanced. We give it a z-index of 2 so it appears above the background layer, and we limit the width to 800 pixels to prevent the content from stretching too wide. Lastly, we add some horizontal padding so things don't touch the edges, especially on smaller screens. Now we move on to the main headline, the .hero title. This is probably your name, so it needs to stand out. We give it a responsive font size using clamp so it scales smoothly across devices. We make it bold, tighten the line height for a modern look, and give it a nice serif font like Playfair display to make it look elegant and professional. Then, for animation purposes, we'll set up the initial styles, a strong blur, a downward position using Translate Y, and set the opacity to 0. This way, when the page loads, we'll animate it smoothly into place using JavaScript. It gives the whole hero section a nice cinematic entrance that really grabs attention right from the start. Alright, now that our hero title is styled and ready for animation, let's move on to the subtitle. We're going to target the .hero subtitle next. We give it a responsive font size so it looks great on any screen size. And we use a secondary text color variable to give it a softer tone. To add a bit of space before the next section, we apply a bottom margin. Since we want this subtitle to animate in just like the main title, we don't need to write those animation styles from scratch again. We simply copy the blur, translate I, and opacity settings from the hero title and paste them here. This keeps the entrance animation consistent across the whole hero section. Now, let's move on to the hero description. We keep the font size readable, not too big, not too small, and once again, we use the secondary text color to keep the visual hierarchy clear. We also give it some bottom spacing to separate it from the button below. And just like before, we copy the same 3 animation-related styles, blur, translate I, and opacity, to prep it for the smooth entrance effect. Alright, now we've reached the final element in our hero section, the call to action button. We set it to inline block so it behaves like a button, add some comfortable padding, and use a gradient background to give it a vibrant look. The text color is set to our primary text color. We remove the default underline and round the edges with a large border radius to make it feel smooth and clickable. We also make the text bold and add a little transition effect for a nice interaction. Now for the hover effect. When the user hovers over the button, we apply a subtle upward movement by translating it slightly on the y-axis. This gives a sense of depth and makes the button feel more interactive. Finally, just like we did with the title, subtitle, and description, we go ahead and copy the same 3 lines for the entrance animation, the blur, the vertical movement, and the opacity, and paste them here too. That wraps up the hero section structure and styling. Now we're all set to move into the animation logic using GSAP inside our app.js file. Alright, so now let's navigate over to our JavaScript file, specifically to the init animations function. If you remember, this is where we've already added our navigation animation, and right below that, we're going to define a smooth entrance animation for all the hero content, one element at a time. To do that, we first create a new GSAP timeline and call it HeroTL. This timeline lets us chain multiple animations together in a sequence. We start with the hero title. Remember those initial styles we added earlier in the CSS, the blur, the downward translation, and the zero opacity? Well now, using GSAP, we animate them back to normal. So we set the opacity to 1, remove the blur, and reset the Y position to 0. We give it a nice duration of 1.2 seconds and use a power3.out easing function for that smooth feel. Next comes the hero subtitle. We do the exact same thing, fade it in, remove the blur, bring it up into place. But this time we reduce the duration a bit to 0.8 seconds. Also, we overlap this with the previous animation using the timeline offset syntax. We start the subtitle animation half a second before the title finishes, which creates a nice flowing motion instead of waiting for each one to fully complete. Then, we do the same for the hero description. Again, we animate the opacity, blur, and vertical movement with a little overlap, so it feels cohesive and smooth. Finally, we bring in the call to action button with the same animation setup, fade in, sharpen, and lift it into place. This one overlaps slightly with the description too, giving us that polished, layered animation effect. And that's it. Now our entire hero section animates in beautifully as the page loads, all handled within one timeline and fully customizable if we ever want to tweak the timing or order later on. Now let's move on to the next section of our portfolio. Now we're diving into one of the most exciting parts of this portfolio project, adding a 3D model to our website using Spline. If you're not familiar with Spline yet, let me give you a quick overview. Spline is an online 3D design tool that lets you create interactive 3D scenes without writing any code. It's super beginner-friendly and has a very modern UI. What makes it so powerful is that you can not only design 3D models visually, but also animate them and export them in a way that's fully web-friendly. It's like Figma, but for 3D and perfect for developers and designers alike. If you don't already have an account, you'll need to sign up. It's totally free. Once you're logged in, click the Get Started button, and that'll take you into the main interface. Now, on the left sidebar, you'll see a section called Community. Go ahead and click on that. This is where users from around the world upload their 3D models and make them public, so anyone can remix and use them. You can scroll through the list, preview any model you like, and click Remix to make your own editable version of it. For this project, I've already prepared a 3D model for you. You'll find the link to it in the video description. Click on that link, and it'll open a Spline file in view mode. Right at the top, you'll see a button that says Duplicate File. Go ahead and click that. Now you're inside your own editable version of the model in the Spline editor. Before moving forward, don't zoom in or out too much here because Spline will save that zoom level as part of the model's camera settings, which can affect how large or small it appears inside your website. So just leave the view as is. Next, we're going to export this model. So click the Export button up in the top bar. From there, choose Public URL, then go into the Play settings. This is important. First, set the cursor to default so it doesn't show a pointer hand. Then, set Page Scroll to Yes. That will allow the rest of your website to scroll naturally even when the 3D model is being viewed. Now, Spline does show a small logo on the viewer for free accounts. To remove it completely, you need to upgrade to a premium plan. But since we're keeping this project budget-friendly, we'll stick to the free plan, and I'll show you a little trick in the CSS to push the logo out of sight later on. Next, scroll down and hit the Update Public URL button. This regenerates the embed with your current settings. Once that's done, go back to the left panel, click on Viewer, and hit Update Viewer at the bottom. Once that finishes, you'll see the new embed code appear. Copy that whole snippet. Now head back into your HTML file. Scroll to the area just above where we include the GSAP plugins. Paste the embed code right there. You'll now see two important things. The first is a Spline Viewer tag. This is a custom HTML element that renders your 3D scene inside the web page. It's like a mini canvas that brings your Spline model to life in real time. The second is a scripted tag. This loads the Spline Viewer JavaScript library, which is required to make the custom element actually work and render the model properly. Alright, now we're almost at the finish line, and this next step is all about organizing our code and making our layout visually balanced. So here's what we'll do. We're going to move the Spline 3D model into the Hero section so that it becomes part of the main visual of our landing area. So inside our HTML, we'll cut the Spline Viewer element and scroll to our Hero structure and inside its main section element. Right under the image element, we paste the Spline Viewer right there. That way it visually appears as a background piece of that Hero layout. To make sure we can style it later in CSS, we're going to give this Spline element a class name. Let's call it something clear and readable like Hero 3D Model. Now let's save the file and preview it in the browser. You'll now see that the 3D model is rendered properly and is showing up inside the Hero section, which is exactly what we want. But as you'll notice, its placement probably needs a little tweaking. So next, we'll head over to our CSS file and start styling this new 3D model class. First, we set its position to absolute. Then, we give it a width. This makes it extend beyond its container slightly. And finally, we apply a z-index of -1. Awesome. Now it's looking really clean and modern. With that, the project structure is complete. The only step left is to make sure our design looks good across all screen sizes. In other words, make it responsive. So go back to the browser, right-click anywhere on the page, and choose Inspect to open up the developer tools. Then click on the device toggle icon to simulate different screen widths. You'll notice that everything looks great as long as the screen width is above 1000 pixels. But once we start shrinking it down, the Hero image looks a bit too large for smaller screens. So to fix that, let's head back to our CSS file, and we'll add a media query to handle smaller screens. Specifically, we'll use a rule that activates when the screen width is below 180 pixels. Inside this media query, we'll target the Hero image class and reduce its height to 38%. This keeps the image smaller and ensures that everything fits comfortably, even on tablets. Perfect, the tablet view is nice and balanced. But now let's make sure the design works beautifully on mobile devices, especially for screen widths under 768 pixels. So let's imagine we're now testing this on a mobile phone. You'll likely notice the layout feels a bit tight, the elements are overlapping or just not fitting quite right. That's totally normal, we just need to apply some mobile-specific styling using a media query. So let's jump back into our CSS file. We're going to create a new one for screens with a maximum width of 768 pixels, which is a common breakpoint for smartphones. First, we want to clean up the navigation bar. On smaller screens, there isn't much room for all the nav links to sit in a row, so instead, we hide the nav links entirely. That gives us space. Then, we display the menu toggle button, which is the hamburger icon that lets users open a mobile menu. So now, navigation is simplified for mobile. Next, we adjust padding. For both the Hero content and the nav container, we reduce the horizontal padding to 1 rem, which gives content a bit more breathing room on narrow screens without feeling too cramped. Now, we hide both cursor and cursor follower to avoid unnecessary elements that don't apply in touch-based navigation. Let's move on to the Hero section. To make this layout more vertically friendly, we change the Hero structure using Flex Direction Column Reverse. This stacks the text content above the image or the 3D model, which makes more sense on mobile screens where vertical space is key and you want the message to appear before the visuals. Finally, we style the Hero image. On smaller screens, we reduce its height to 30% to make sure it doesn't dominate the screen. And we remove any margins to keep everything tight and centered. Now go ahead and save your CSS and check the result on your mobile preview. Everything should now be properly spaced, readable, and user-friendly. The navigation is simplified, the content flows top-down, and the 3D model sits comfortably within the screen. With that, your portfolio project is now fully responsive, from large desktops to tablets to mobile phones. So congrats, you've just completed this amazing project. If you faced any issues along the way, or if any part of my explanation was unclear, feel free to leave a comment down below and let me know. I'd be happy to help you out. Thanks a lot for coding along with me. I really hope you enjoyed building this step by step and learned something new. I'll be back soon with another exciting project. So, take care.